Everyone. Got it. Okay. Good evening to everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday night Parsha Shir. This evening, we're going to be talking about Parashat Vayigash, which is going to be read with Hashem's help throughout the world on Shabbos morning. Our focus today will be on the dramatic plea of Yehuda, its structure, what it refers to, and it perhaps in all of Tanakh, it may be the most heartrending and powerful plea in all of Tanakh. So why don't we get started right now? Because actually, as I had mentioned at the beginning of the story of Yosef, this is the longest continuous story in all of Chumash, definitely. And the reason is that every event is tied to the event which precedes it and could not actually occur without that prior event. Where else do we find a similar type of structure? That's in Megillat Esther, where in the Megillah, every single parak, sometimes 2 or 3 events within a parak, each leads to directly to subsequent events. And that's what we have here. So today, before we even begin reading the Parsha of Vayigash, we're going to look at the last few psukim of last week's Parsha of Miketz. And by the way, it's the same type of an idea that actually occurred after the first of these 3 Parshiot, at the end of Parshat Vayeshev, when Yosef was sold to Mitzrayim, and everything looked so devastatingly difficult for him. And as you recall, even though everything looked so terrible, Bravanel, as I mentioned last week, points to 10 events of tragedy that occurred in Parshat Vayeshev, and they were transformed into joyful, optimistic, hopeful things. And so, but at the very end of Parshat Vayeshev, when Yosef interprets the dreams of the butler, and he interprets the dreams of the baker, and the baker is hanged as Yosef predicted, and the butler is restored to his position, Yosef's last words to him were, "Remember me to Paro." And the last word in Parshat Vayeshev was Vayishkachehu. He didn't remember Lo Zachar et Yosef, Vayishkachehu. And he actually put him in the back of his mind so that he wouldn't have to remember what he actually owed to this Jewish slave. Then, of course, what we find out in this last week's Parsha, Miketz, Yosef is taken from the pit, which is the dungeon, and he's brought to Paro, where he interprets Paro's very enigmatic dreams. And Paro sees the greatness of Yosef and appoints him to be the head of Mitzrayim. And where he was sold in the previous Parsha, he becomes the seller. He becomes the seller of grain. He himself was sold in Parshat Vayeshev. Now he becomes the seller. And of course, who comes to get the grain? His brothers. He sees them. And it's interesting in that Parsha, the Parsha says about Yosef that he remembered the dreams. It doesn't say he remembered what the brothers did to him. It says he remembered the dreams, because Yosef always understood that there's a plan. And that's a very telling pasuk that we have in last week's Parsha, that Yosef remembered the dreams, not the tragedy of his being sold, but the dreams themselves were indicative of Hashem's overall plan. Now, of course, when they come in front of him, they see him. And lastly, in Parshat Miketz, he treats them he treats them in some ways very well. Other ways, he treats them in a manner which would distance them and cause them anxiety. And then, of course, at the very end of this last parsha, what does he do? He maneuvers them to allow that Yaakov, Yisrael, would allow his son, Binyamin, to go. This is the very last child that he has, the last remnant from his beloved wife, Rachel. And he convinces them to convince their father to allow him to leave. And now allow Binyamin to leave and to come back. And of course, he then sets up this framing. He literally framed Binyamin to see, has anything changed? Is Binyamin, as far as they're concerned, going to receive the same fate as Yosef was? Of course, that's why I want to pick up at the very end of Parshat Miketz, because unless we have that, we're not going to understand Yehuda's plea. So if we turn to Perek Mem Daled, and we look at and Pasuk, we can actually look at Pasuk Yud Bet, number 12, Pasuk 12. And again, Yosef had his primary servant put his royal goblet in the sack of none other than Binyamin. Because now Yosef wants to see, has anything changed? Would they care about their brother, or, as we would say in our common parlance now, would they throw him under the bus or under the chariot? I don't know what they would say, but that's what he wanted to know. Are they going to care about him? So now in Pasuk Yud Bet, Perek Mem Daled, Pasuk Yud Bet, which is the very end of last week's parsha, which is so connected to this one, they searched. Yosef's men searched. And of course, as was planned, the royal goblet was found, or chalice was found in the sack of Binyamin. And what does it say? They all tore their clothes. They tore their clothes because they were in a state of mourning. And then the Torah tells us, Vayavo Yehuda ve'achav beita Yosef. It's interesting that in Pasuk Yud Daled, it says Yehuda and the brothers came to Yosef to Yosef's abode. And what we're seeing here, of course, is the emergence of Yehuda. Yehuda, certainly at the very beginning, he was the one who said, what's the sense of killing our brother? Let's just throw him in a pit and sell him. Okay, and they bought into that. And Yosef and Yehuda, of course, convinced Yaakov. Yehuda convinced Yaakov to allow Binyamin to go. And how do we know that? He says in Perek Mem Gimel, he says, listen, Dad, let him go. And I know that you're worried, but I want to tell you, Anochi e'ervenu, I will guarantee him. I will guarantee him. I will be surety for him, meaning to say that I'll go in his place. If something should happen to him where they would want him to become imprisoned, I'll go instead of him. That's how serious I am that we need to do this, and that I'm willing to become an arev, an eravon. I'm willing to become collateral for him. And so they go now. Yehuda is leading the group, and they all really think at this point that they're all going to end up being slaves. After all, maybe they're all complicit in what was going on, for all they know. And we know that he accused them all of being spies when they first came. So then Yehuda begins his plea in last week's parsha. Pasuk Tet Zayin. Vayomer Yehuda ma nomar ladoni. What shall we say? There's nothing for us to say. Ma nedaber. How can we resist? We can't even resist or insist on something. Uman itztadak. We can't justify ourselves. Ha'elokim matza et avon avodecha. God himself has found the wrongdoing of your servants, avodecha, plural. He's thinking in terms of all of them. None of them are going to go home. Hinenu avadim ladonim. He says, you know what? Please, don't kill Binyamin. Let us all become slaves. Gam anachnu, gam asher nimtza hagavia biyado. We, and the one in whose sack we found the royal chalice. Now, Yosef, who is so brilliant, has thought about this already. Vayomer chalilali. Far be it from me. Now, so do you think I'm going to make you all slaves because you have the person that you brought as a crook? Why should all of you suffer? Why should all of you be enslaved here? No, the one in whose sack we found the gavia, we found the chalice, he's going to be the slave. Vatem, what will your fate be? Alu l'shalom el avichem. Go in peace el avichem. Now, just like in last week's parsha, the last word was vayishkachehu. The butler forgot Yosef, or shall we say, intentionally forgot him. That word vayishkachehu, we end it right there. We have to wait, so to speak, a week to hear what else is going to happen. Here, the last word in last week's parsha is, in parsha Miketz is, va'atem, and you, alu l'shalom el avichem. A complete impossibility. How could they ever have peace or peace of mind? But he says, you all go, you go back in peace to your father. Now Yehuda steps up with perhaps the most poignant plea, soliloquy in all of Tanakh. And he now makes the case to allow Binyamin to go. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, who lived in the 15th century, he preceded Abravanel. He lived. Rabbi Yitzchak Arama was a Spanish Sephardi gadol, the Israel, wrote extensively, and we should also point out that the Sephardim also were very much inclined to have philosophical leanings in their interpretations of things. And he wrote again extensively, just like Abravanel did, but he preceded Abravanel. Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, in his classic work Akedat Yitzchak, says that there are basically three three justifications for clemency. In other words, if you're the lawyer, so you have to take the tactic of the one that you hope will find favor in the eyes of the judge, or in this case, of the viceroy, the second to the king. And these are the three. He says there are three reasons. There are three actual justifications that one could make. One is the punishment is too severe. Well, clearly Yehuda is not going to say that. That's the last thing that he's going to say, because that reflects badly upon Yosef, whom he does not realize is Yosef. The second is the second reason to ask for clemency. So is the impact on others. Now we know even in our modern court system, when someone is being punished, when they've been found guilty for some criminal offense, and it appears that they will be punished severely, either through jail time or worse, extended jail time. So they have what they call an impact statement. The impact this had, on the family that person has hurt. In other words, the family of the victim, and they talk about the impact of, let's say, the fact that the victim is no longer with them, or is no longer the same as he was. It's also the impact. The judge has to look at the impact of incarceration or in this case, enslavement on what will happen to the rest of the family. And we'll see what that is. And thirdly, just asking for outright mercy. There's no justification, Your Honor, but we're asking for mercy. It appears that Yehuda, in his plea now, has chosen the latter two. One is the powerful impact that Binyamin's incarceration and enslavement would have on the family itself. So you might say to yourself, why would Yosef, who's not, they don't know to be Yosef, why would this viceroy in Egypt care about the impact? This is the magnificence of Yehuda's plea. He literally takes a situation which, under normal circumstances, we would say, you haven't got a chance, fella. But he does. And we're going to read it now. It's in at the beginning of Vayigash. It's found on Perek Mem Daled, chapter 44, beginning verse 18. Vayigash elav Yehuda. Now, Yehuda then comes near to him. You can see the drama that is here. Yehuda is standing with the brothers. They're in Yosef's house, or his mansion, whatever you would call it, his palace. There they are standing with nothing to be able to defend themselves. And Yehuda walks up to Yosef and he whispers to him. This particular plea seems to be out of the earshot of his brothers. Now, Rashi does bring the medrash which says that it's a threat inherent within Yosef's Yehuda's plea, where he says, I want to speak to you privately because you are like Paro. And Rashi, for some reason, chooses to say that implied here is a threat. Either you do something to get us all out of this situation, or if you are like Paro, just as we can defeat Paro, we will be able to defeat you. Rather unlikely, but Rashi brings it. It's more likely, I think, that what Rav Hirsch says is probably very accurate. He says that I want you to know, Your Honor, in this case, it's Yosef. When I speak to you, it's with the reverence that I would speak to Paro himself. You might be the viceroy, you might be second, but I'm talking to you with the same reverence, the same respect that I would have for Paro. That's Rav Hirsch. Now, we're going to look and see how beautifully constructed these psukim are. They are a number. We're going to divide this plea into parts. The beginning of it appears that Yehuda is talking out loud. That's why I could call it a soliloquy too. He's thinking out loud and talking out loud. It's as if he's saying, how did we get into this situation? How did it happen? That 12 people, or 11 people who are 10, actually it's 10, 10 people who were just coming like everybody else in the world because they were on the verge of starvation. We come like everybody else, and all of a sudden, before you know it, we're into a situation where we are threatened. So he says, we came and you asked Adoni. Notice, by the way, he always talks in third person. In the yeshiva world, the right-wing yeshiva world, they talk to their Rebbe in third person, and I think that's both European and, of course, it's also Middle Eastern. It's found in the Torah that a sign of reverence is you don't talk in second person. You said, but rather my master said. So we find this in virtually all of the psukim here. He begins by saying in Pasuk Yotet, Adoni sha'ala tavodav lemor. My master asked his servants, meaning us. They talk even about themselves in third person. Hayesh lachem av o ach. Really out of what we would say is left field. What a matter of simple conversation. Rav Hirsch also seems to say that all of these early psukim deal with conversations that Yosef must have had in the 3 days that he put them in jail when they came to Mitzrayim the first time. He locked them up. They were all in jail, and now, of course, they are totally bewildered. They don't know how this could happen. But Yosef must have come in and said, "Well, tell me, you have a father? Do you have brothers? Is there anybody else in your family?" And in Pasuk Kaf Aleph said, "Vatomer al avadech," and they said, "We do. We have one." The father loves the brother, and he says, He says, the Yeshtanu Avzakain, we have, and that's Pasuk Chaf, we have an old father, and we have Yeled Zikunim Katan. Notice how he uses the phrase, almost a manipulative type of a phrase, the Yeled Zikunim. He calls him a child of old age, Katan, small, the Achiv mate, and his brother died. So one of the questions we have to ask is, whoa, here. Yehuda knows quite well that he was sold. He didn't die. But the Ketava Kabbalah, Rabbi Yaakov Mecklenburg says, you know what? He's not lying. Because the word mate, he said, is oftentimes used to express the status of a person when it's been greatly reduced. For example, a person who is blind is called mate. He's like dead. A person who is greatly impoverished is called like dead. So here, certainly his status of moving from being the favored son of Yaakov now was sold into slavery, he could say that. And it's not really a lie. And for all he knew, by the way, he could be physically dead too. So it's not a lie. And then he says, Vayivater hu levado le'imo, and all that's left now is this young Yeled Katan. He's not such a Katan. He's 30 years old or 25 years old, but he's not such a Katan. But he's a grown man. But again, Yosef is pulling out all. Yehuda is pulling out all the stops, and he uses terms that naturally in every culture are designed to bring out a sense of sympathy. Okay, and he says, and he's the only son left to his mother, the Aviva Hevo, and his father has great love for him. Okay, so notice what he's doing, and now we're gonna watch how he speaks about his father, and he says, "You said, Mr. Viceroy, okay, Tomer el Avadecha, and you said to your servants, bring him down to me. I want to see him." And we said, I was going through, you said, we said, you said, we said. It's as if he's talking out loud, and he's really thinking. And we said, the boy cannot leave his father, meaning in this case, of course, Binyamin, v'azav et aviv v'meit, because if he leaves his father, he will die. Pronominal ambiguity, one of my favorite aspects of learning Tanakh, and that is pronouns, as we know, are words which are used in place of the noun. If he says, v'azav et aviv, if he leaves his father, he will die, who will die? Will it be my father that will die? Because that's the antecedent, the closest one. Or maybe the child will die. Because after all, he doesn't talk about his age at all at this point. And maybe we'll be killing an innocent person or maybe two innocent people. And you will see from this point on, generally speaking, Yehuda now refers to his father as Avdecha Avi. Avdecha Avi. He doesn't say my father. He says, your servant, my father. So what he is doing here, of course, is establishing subservience. We are not spies. We are simple people who are willing to submit ourselves to your authority, whatever it may be. And he says, if it would come that if we bring the child and you said we can't see you anymore unless we bring this child, is Vayiki Alinu El Avdecha Avi, when we went and we conveyed this message back in Canaan, we conveyed this message to Avdecha Avi, your servant, my father. So he said, I'm not going to let him go, because if that's all I have left of Rachel. That's all I have left. And I know what happened to Shimon, and I know what happened to Yosef. I'm not going to do it. And then in Pasuk Kav Zayin, Vayomer Avdecha Avi, again, your servant, my father, said to us, you know the history of this child and of my children from Rachel, okay? And he says, now, if you take this son, if you take this child from me, and some tragedy should befall him, then voradtem et sevati b'ra'ah shola. Then you will guarantee that you will bringing me to my death in sadness and in grief. So Yehuda is bearing his soul to this viceroy. And now, he says in Pasuk Kaf, and Pasuk Lamed, I'm sorry, Kivoi al avdecha avi. Now, if I come back, you said we can all go back home. I can't go back home. If I go back home, I have to tell this story to my father. And he says, if I would come to your servant, my father, and the boy isn't with us, in other words, Binyamin, you're going to keep him as a slave, then and his soul is bound up in my father's soul. He says, what will happen? He'll see as soon as he sees, Rav Hirsch says, as soon as he sees there's no Binyamin, I won't even get a chance to explain it to him. He'll just die in grief. Then he says, and then if that's the case, we will indeed have brought our father to his grave in absolute abject grief. Now, this is the situation. He sets it up to see that number one, the intense love of the father for this remaining son, and also the fact that his father is old. Now in Pasuk Lamed Bet we have a remarkable pasuk. Your servant, in this case Yehuda is talking about himself, Arav et Anar. Your servant, that is I pledged myself concerning the boy. I will be the collateral. I can't go back. I can't go back because I promised my father that if push comes to shove, he'll come back, and I won't. That's fine. But I made the promise. Please don't send him back. Please don't send me back without him. Better I should be here. Because he says, if I will not bring him back to you, I already pledged to my father, chatati, then I will have sinned la'avi, to my father forever, the rest of my life. And now comes the magnificent offer. Ve'ata. Now, yeshiv na avdecha tachat. Let me, your servant, be placed in place of the boy. Eved ladun, I will be the slave. V'anar ya'alem echav, and let the boy go back with the rest of the brothers. We know that they're all safe. Because then he says, how shall I ever go back to my father? And v'anar einenu iti, and Binyamin would not be with me. Why? And that I will find in other words, forever I will see the evil that will find Avi, my father. Notice the last word in his plea is Avi. The entire plea, he refers to his father, Avdecha Avi, your servant, your servant. In the end, Yehuda pulls out the last stop. He says, you must be a father. Now I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you, a father, about another father. Not even in terms of subservience. You are a father. He is a father. Surely you must know the grief that will overcome you. Magnificent. Now, the question is, I want to, as we come to the last couple of moments here, I want to point out to you how important it is that he says, when they were supposed to go back, Yehuda says to Yaakov back, in Parshat Miketz, in other words, please let him go with me. Ani e'ervenu, I will secure him. I will guarantee him. I will give myself in his place if it's necessary. That's what an eravon is. For example, if somebody takes out a loan, we know that they have to have collateral, and and you put up a collateral. It could be money in those days, or even now, it could be some item of equal value. But what happens is if I don't pay up, you get that. And Yehuda said to his father, Yaakov, before Binyamin came, the first time, and they're coming back to Mitzrayim the second time, he said, Ani erevenu. Not that not just I will guarantee you, I will go in his place. That's what an eravon does. It literally is the substitute for that which is taken. Now, where do we find eravon again before this in Yehuda's life? Where do we find that? We find it when Yosef is sold, and then we have this intervening pasuk, or parak Lamed Chet, the intervening parak that talks about Yehuda and Tamar, where he strung her along, and he was a very uncaring person at that time, very uncaring. He didn't matter to him what he said to his father. Look, is this Akirna? Look at this coat. Is this your son's coat? Dad, look what we found. No, that's not what he said. Is this your son's coat? Your son's coat, not our brothers or our beloved family member. No. Is this your son's coat? He hatched a plot that did that. And then the Torah intervening. We want to find out what's going on with Yosef when he's sold. But before we find out about Yosef being sold, we have a story which seemed to be a complete non sequitur, meaning to say, what is it doing here? Yehuda and Tamar, so what? The answer is, at this point in Yehuda's life, he was completely self-absorbed, completely self-absorbed. What is in it for me? So Yehuda goes, and he doesn't care that Tamar is living as an almanah for years, and then he doesn't realize it. But after his wife dies, he had a wife. After his wife dies, so he goes out and he sees what appears to be a harlot, and he decides to relieve himself of the sexual tension that may have built up, and he decides he's going to pay this harlot, whom he thinks is a harlot. He doesn't even realize during this most intimate act, he doesn't realize he's with his own daughter-in-law, that he doesn't know. And it's, of course, the act of a harlot and the person who takes the service what do? We take the most intimate human act, ideally intimate and beautiful, and they turn it into a business deal. She provides a service, he provides, and he gets the pleasure, and he has to pay for it. But he didn't have money with him. He didn't have anything with him. So she said, what are you going to give me as an eravon? What are you going to give me as security? This is where security enters into his life. And he realizes when he finally is able to pay up. And then when he finds out and he thinks that Tamar has played the role of a harlot, in those days, the idea of Yibum even extended to the father-in-law, but he thinks that she's just being promiscuous. He says, take her out. What does he say? Take her out and burn her. She won't embarrass him. She says, to whom these belong, right? And what is the eravon? The eravon is chotamcha uptilecha, your seal and your sash, v'hamateh asher biyadecha, and your walking stick. You, she doesn't say it's you. She just says whoever belongs, to whomever these belong, that's the person by whom I've become pregnant. Light bulbs go off. Yehuda says, Sadakami many. She clearly is greater than I. And that was the turning point in his life. What was the turning point in his life? The eravon, the security, the pledge that he made to her, just thinking he was paying off a business deal, really changed his life. From that moment, Yehuda was a changed person because he realized someone is willing to even die, because if he didn't agree that these were his, so she would have died. That was the penalty that was supposed to be. And so Yehuda said, no, she is greater than I. And from that moment on, his life was changed. And to the point where Yehuda, and only Yehuda, was able to make the plea to Yosef, whom we thought was the viceroy, to save his brother Binyamin. Now Yehuda is clearly the greatest Baal Tshuva in the Torah, maybe even Tanakh, because of the fact that he goes from complete self-absorption to willingly giving himself up for another human being. This is not the same Yehuda. This is a Yehuda who was completely transformed. That's the story here. And of course, from this point on, Yehuda and Tamar have twins, and over several generations, David HaMelech is born, who, by the way, was also one of the great Balei Tshuva of Tanakh. Well, everyone, have a good evening. And Mirz Hashem will be able to talk to you next week about Parshat Vayechi. And thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Yasher Koach. Thank you.
Baruch Hu.
Thank you. Always fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ruchim to you.
Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
You too. Good Shabbos, everyone. Yeah.